Hey guys, it's Gwen. Welcome back to my channel and welcome if you are new. Today I have some thrift flip ideas for you using some yard sale finds. I found this cute little piece of wood, we'll call it salvage wood, probably came from a dresser mirror if I had to guess. And it isn't a really dark color wood, as you can see. So I did forget to hit record. I thought it was recording when I started painting this piece, but I did use some white chalk paint by Waverly. Now, full disclosure, I would probably use some shellac in the future if I were to paint anything this dark. The problem that I had as I was painting this was the bleed through that was coming through the white. Even though I painted it several coats just to cover it up, I noticed in different areas that dark orangey color wanted to really come through the white. Now I did my best in covering up the majority of it as I saw it pop up when I was drying this piece, but in different areas it did still show through, and I wasn't going to fight it at this point. I was just going to keep it as is. You probably wouldn't even notice. And if, depending on where I display this, I don't think anyone else would notice either, just myself. But if I were to go back and do this in a better way, and if I really wanted this to be done properly, that's what I would advise, for you to use some shellac when you are using light colored paint over dark finishes, because of that bleed through that happens. But regardless, I just kept on moving with the process. I did use this white Waverly chalk paint like I mentioned. Mine was a little thick, so I did have to dilute it just a bit. Once I dried this piece using the heat gun, I went ahead and took some Elmer's glue. This was sort of an afterthought. I figured, let me try and add some crackle to this just for a little bit more added interest. So I took like a foam brush and just started to add some Elmer's glue. This is just a school glue. And I did add it to certain areas because I didn't want the entire piece to look crackled. I just wanted different parts of this piece to have it. So I just experimented, and I have done this process in the past with a few of my DIYs that I have on my videos on this channel. So with this, I just went a little bit more mild, and I just added a little bit of the glue here and there. And then I sped it up with the heat gun just to see if I would get that effect. And it was starting to show through, but they are subtle cracks, and I will try to point them out to you here in this video where it might be apparent, like in this section right here. Like I said, it's very subtle, and that's sort of the look I was trying to achieve. So if you want more of big cracks, you definitely have to go thicker with the glue. And depending on your base color and the color you decide to paint over the glue is what's going to show up, because that base color is what's going to show through the cracks, if you will. After that part was done, I went ahead and grabbed my sanding sponge. This is just a Dollar Tree sanding sponge. And I just started to sand off the different parts of this piece, focusing mostly on corners, edges, areas that might typically get scuffed or worn more easily. And I just kept on until I was happy. I knew I wanted to add quite a bit of distress marks here, and I was having a little bit of a hard time here with this sanding sponge. It probably would have been easier just starting off with wet distressing, to be honest, because that is essentially what I ended up doing. Now that came as an accident because I was using a wet wipe to sort of clean off all of the sanded parts. And as I was doing so, the paint was coming off. So I was like, I should have done this in the first place. It could have saved me a lot more elbow grease, because it took some elbow grease just to scuff or to rub off that paint just to create those distress marks. Could be that my sanding sponge was a little bit on the old side, and I probably should have been using a more coarser sponge. So if you are to do this, just make sure if you are trying to achieve big distress marks, go with a coarse sponge or coarse sandpaper just to save yourself the hardship. But using a wet wipe or a wet rag also is effective when trying to achieve any type of distressing. It's called wet distressing. So I would definitely do that in the future if I was struggling to sand off the areas. It just helps to lift the paint off a lot more easily. So I started to do that, just grabbing that wet sponge and just rubbing off in the areas, and then going on with my sponge and then just distressing those areas that I sort of wet. And there you can see I got that really big distress mark right there on the right side, and that's the look I was going for. I didn't want to go too crazy, but I did want to have random bits of missing paint here and there. So I did like the look of this when everything was said and done. I finished it off with some DIY top coat. This is called Big Top. I just gave it a good couple coats with a foam brush. And this is where I started really noticing like parts of like the bleed through of the dark finish coming through the white paint. And, you know, I really didn't care too much, you know, that it was showing, because like I said, it wasn't too obvious and it was only in certain parts of it, certain areas. So I wasn't going to let it like bother me, because after all, this is more of a rustic piece, and it wouldn't really be obvious to a lot of people anyway. So with that said, I think I like how it turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed that process. Now moving on to the next DIY, I'm using one of these, we'll call it again a salvage piece. It's probably from a dresser or an armoire, like one of those top pieces that they put, you know, to frame out like an armoire piece or a dresser. I found this at a flea market years and years ago. I kid you not. I've had this in my stash for quite some time. I've always been meaning to sort of just hang it up as an architectural salvage, just to a wall decor, wall vignette, but never got around to it. Other things sort of just became a priority in the craft world. So today's the day that I was going to go ahead and make over this piece. I decided I did not really like or care for the look of it being plain, the plain white that it is. So I have these wallpapers in my stash, and these are from Dollar Tree. Very pretty eucalyptus pattern. They're just the wall stickers that Dollar Tree carries. And I had several of these on hand, which was perfect because it did take at least a couple of these sheets to properly fill this architectural salvage. I started off with this Salty Kiss color by DIY. It looks dark, and with this type of paint, it's the mineral paint, I believe. No, clay-based paint. They start off looking dark, and then when it dries, it does dry lighter. But when you go back to top coat it or wax it, it does sort of bring it darker again. But I thought this was going to be a nice complement to the wall stickers. But after painting like the top portion of this salvage piece, I wasn't feeling it. It wasn't looking that great, you know, or complementary to the eucalyptus wall sticker that I was going to be using. The green colors were just off, and they just didn't blend or combine, you know, or correlate the piece very well. So after painting these top sections and then just drying it to see how it dries and how it looks, I didn't like it. So you'll see that I will eventually paint over that using a different paint color. It's a different green. It's called mint chip. Yeah, mint chip. It's called mint chip by DIY. And you can see right here how different the green tones are. This is a lot lighter and softer. And I think that it just looks so much better against or combined with the wallpaper that I will be using. I just think the subtle green color is more complementary in my opinion. So I went ahead and just painted over the darker areas that I painted originally, that dark green. And you will also see that I'm going to go ahead. I started off just painting just the top parts, thinking that since I am going to be covering the majority of this salvage piece with the wallpaper, there wasn't really a need to cover or paint over the entire wood. However, when I did cut out my wallpaper, I wasn't very precise in measuring, and I did end up with some spaces where you can see the white. I didn't want that, so in order to camouflage the gaps in where I had cut the wallpaper, I went ahead and just painted over the entire white parts with that mint chip color. So here I'm moving on to step number 2, and I'm taking this wallpaper, just laying it upside down, face down, and then laying that salvage piece face down on top and just tracing it out. And once I did that, I did cut that out, and I did this same steps to all 3 segments is what I'm going to call it, segments, because I did have to do this in 3 parts because the wallpaper obviously is not the exact length as the salvage piece. So I did have to do one section at a time and then sort of start over and lay that piece on top of another section of the wallpaper and so on and so forth. But when I got to the 3rd segment of it, that's when I had to pull out a new sheet of wallpaper because there wasn't enough left on that first one. But as you can see here, after I finished cutting out that first piece, I did cut out like one whole entire piece to cover that entire section, but I didn't need that top portion. So all I did was just use my fingers and my nails to crease along the line where I will be cutting. But this is the part that I tell you that I went ahead and painted over the entire wood piece just to camouflage any areas that might be exposed by the lack of wallpaper. And again, just to speed up the drying process, I do use my heat gun. You can also use a hair dryer or any type of heat gun or heat tool that you might have on hand. So once everything was dry, it was time to sort of measure out the exact fit. And I just traced along the lines and cut that part off. And this is where you sort of like have to piece all your puzzle pieces together, if you will. And right there, I'm not sure if you can see and notice in the corners is the little extra spaces where the bottom wood was exposed. So that's where painting it was sort of necessary so that it wouldn't be as obvious as if I had kept it the white color. So then I just went ahead and repeated this second step, which is the second part of this salvage piece. I did have to lay the first part just so I knew how much I needed to trace to continue the pattern. And I did that with the 3rd segment as well. Hopefully this is making sense. If not, hopefully just watching is making sense to you. Now that I have my second piece cut out, I did the last step, the last segment, Did the same exact thing, just using all the parts or the puzzle pieces is what I will call it, and just laying them on top of the wood just to kind of see how everything laid and where I needed to continue to trace out the wallpaper. Now, this isn't like exact science or anything, but at least it just gives me a general idea of how much I needed to cut. And everything else is adjustable once I have everything cut out, and I can lay it out and do a dry fit. And then I can make any necessary adjustments as needed if I need to take off a little bit more to a certain part of it. And that was the easy part. It would have been ideal if I had exact cuts where you didn't necessarily have to see like the bottom part, but it is what it is, and I will show you how I end up fixing that situation to make it work for this piece. And it totally takes the look of this to a different level, making it a lot more rustic and grungy, and you'll see that here shortly. So this is a adhesive backing, and you don't want to rely solely on the adhesive that's on the wallpaper because it will eventually come off. It's not ideal for sticking over like a painted surface, especially something like this. It's not meant, I don't think it's meant for permanent adhesion. So I use some Mod Podge to help adhere the wallpaper, just for added security and to make sure that these wallpapers were not going anywhere. So then this is the part where I just sort of line everything up, overlap those tails, and then make any necessary cuts or adjustments if anything was overlapping a little too much. So with Mod Podge, the only downside is that sometimes you will get bubbling or little like gapping underneath your paper that you Mod Podged or decoupaged. And what I didn't show you in this video, because I thought about it later after the recording was done, is I did use my mini press, and I used that on top of wax paper and just ironed on over the wallpaper, and it sort of reactivates that Mod Podge glue. And then you just have to iron over it just to make the paper stick flatter and get rid of all the bubbles. And it creates a more smoother surface, and I really liked, the effect that it gave. So I'll definitely be doing that more often in the future when I do decoupage projects. So I did use some Decrepit Dust by DIY, and initially I was just dry brushing that over those corner edges, just trying to camouflage any gaps between the paper and the wood. I added some more paint, that mint chip paint color, over those edges as well. I wanted it to sort of combine, if you will, like the gaps between the paper and the paint. I just sort of wanted everything to like meld together and sort of look like it flows nicely. So I was trying to achieve that by adding more paint, more of that paint color I used for the top part, which is mint chip, and just slightly painting along the corners of the paper as well. Once that was dry, I took this Decrepit Dust and added it to the areas that I added the paint, to the corners. And I'm going to be playing around with this process. I also did use some white paint as well. And I'm going to sort of keep adding and taking away and adding and taking away and wiping off and adding on, and just keep playing with it until everything looked smooth, like everything just sort of flowed nicely. This part did take a little bit of trial and error, and I really didn't know how it was going to turn out. At some point in this video, I was starting to second guess myself and like wonder, what am I doing? But ultimately, in the end, it came out looking fine. It was good. I mean, this definitely looks like a nice little architectural garden piece now that I added all of that grungy, distressed look to the edges with all the decrepit dust and everything. It just makes it look old. But if you don't want your piece to look old and you want it to look more new without any, without any added grunginess or distressing, then definitely be a lot more careful when it comes to measuring your paper out to make sure that you have the exact fit to cover your salvage piece. But I did not, and I was trying to find a way that would remedy this problem. Now, could I have just lived with it and not tried to camouflage these little flaws? Yeah, I could have, but that sort of thing, I'm sort of like critical of my own work, and so if it bothers me, I'm going to try to do something to fix it, even if it means that only I notice the problem. So after I achieved the look that I was going for, it ended up coming out really nicely. And I did enjoy this process, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let's take a final look at both of the projects that I had in this video. And as always, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and please subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this type of content. Share this video and don't forget to comment down below, and I will catch you in my next video. Thanks for watching.